Welcome to episode 241 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Laws Guy. It's June 29, 1958. We're in Solna, just north of Stockholm, the capital of Sweden. Råsunda Stadium, World Cup final. Brazil against the hosts from Sweden. And today, Brazil finally become Brazil. Brazil 5, Sweden 2. Vavá twice, Pelé twice, Zagallo once. A 17-year-old genius crying into history. A captain, Bellini, lifting the Schulz-Rimet trophy above his head and creating the image every captain has copied since. And a country that had carried the wound of 1950 now receives its first World Cup. But how did we get here? Start with Brazil before Brazil became myth. Football comes to Brazil through British schools, ports, railways and clubs. But it doesn't stay British. It becomes Brazilian, mixed, urban, improvisational, racial, musical, political, and never simple. Brazil win the South American Championship in 1919, again in 1922, and again in 1949. But on the world stage, the early World Cups are uneven. 1930, out in the group. 1934, out early again. 1938, breakthrough. Leonidas, the Black Diamond, becomes a global star, and Brazil finished third. Then 1950, the World Cup comes to Brazil. Maracanazo is built as a monument, which we talked about in episode 228. Brazil need only a draw against Uruguay in the final group match. They go ahead 1-0, but they lose. Uruguay 2, Brazil 1, the Maracanazo, a national silence. The white shirt becomes contaminated by memory. So Brazil change. A design competition gives them the yellow shirt, blue shorts and white socks, the colors that will become the most famous uniform in football. But in 1954, the trauma is not gone. Brazil lose to Hungary in the Battle of Bern, which we talked about just two days ago here on the show. Talent yes, control no. By 1958, Brazil decide they cannot simply rely on genius. They prepare. The delegation to Sweden includes doctors, a psychologist, a fitness structure, scouting, organization, and a seriousness that many rivals don't match. Vicente Feola is the coach, experienced, sometimes mocked as passive, even accused of falling asleep in the dugout, but surrounded by staff and players who helped shape the team. Tactically, Brazil popularized the 4-2-4, 4 defenders, 2 midfielders and 4 attackers. But it isn't just numbers. It gives width to Garrincha, balance to Zagallo, command to Didi, and freedom to Pelé and Vavá. At first, Pelé doesn't play. He's carrying a knee problem. Garrincha doesn't start either, partly because of doubts about his tactical discipline. Brazil beat Austria 3-0, then draw 0-0 with England, the first goalless draw in World Cup history. Then, against the Soviet Union, the team changes. Garrincha starts. Pelé starts. In the first minutes, Garrincha terrifies the Soviet defense. Brazil win 2-0. Now the tournament has seen the future. Brazil beat Wales 1-0 in the quarterfinal. Pelé scores the only goal, the youngest goal scorer in World Cup history at the time. Then Brazil beats France 5-2 in the semi-final. Just Fontaine scores for France, of course, because in 1958, Just Fontaine scores against almost everyone. But Pelé scores a hat-trick, and Brazil are in the final. Now Sweden. Sweden are hosts, but not passengers. They have deep football history. They won Olympic bronze in 1924 and gold in London in 1948. That 1948 side helped create one of the great export waves in European football. Gunnar Gren, Gunnar Nordahl, and Nils Liedholm, GreNoLi, who changed AC Milan and Serie A. We told that story in episode 97. But Swedish football had a tension of its own. Amateur ideals at home, professional opportunity abroad. For years, players who went professional outside Sweden could find themselves separated from the national team. By 1958, Sweden chose pragmatism. The old professionals are welcome back. Nils Liedholm, the Milan brain. Gunnar Gren, now 37. Kurt Hamrin, dangerous from the right. Lennart Nacka Skoglund and Agne Simonsson. A strong host team coached by George Rayner, the Englishman who had already shaped Sweden's Olympic success. Sweden's route is excellent. Mexico 3-0, Hungary 2-1, Wales 0-0. Then the Soviet Union 2-0 in the quarterfinal. Then West Germany 3-1 in the semi-final. They have beaten Hungary, the Soviet Union, and the defending world champions. So the final is not coronation by appointment. Brazil still have to win it. Then comes a kit problem. Both teams normally wear yellow. Sweden win the right to wear it. Brazil cannot wear white, not in a World Cup final, not after 1950. So Brazil buy blue shirts and sew on the badge. The most Brazilian day in football history will be played in blue. June 29, Råsunda, almost 50,000 in attendance. 4th minute, Sweden score. Liedholm, 35 years old, drifts through the Brazilian defense and finishes low. Sweden 1, Brazil 0. For a moment, the old ghosts are awake. But then Garrincha answers, not by scoring, but by destroying the matchup. 9th minute, Garrincha beats his man on the right, reaches the line, crosses low. Vavá scores, 1-1. 32nd minute, almost the same thing. Garrincha again, low cross again, Vavá again. Brazil 2, Sweden 1. The panic is gone. The football begins. 55th minute, Pelé receives in the box with his back to the goal. He controls on his chest, he flicks the ball over the defender, and then he volleys into the net. Crazy technique by the 17-year-old, and in a World Cup final. Brazil 3, Sweden 1. 68th minute, Zagallo makes it 4. Not the most glamorous name perhaps, but one of the most important, the winger who works, covers, balances, and then later becomes the coach of Brazil 1970. Sweden pull one back through Simonsson, 4-2, then stoppage time. Pelé scores again, this time with a header. Brazil 5, Sweden 2. The final whistle goes. Pelé cries. The Swedish crowd applauds. Sigge Parling later said that after Brazil's 5th goal, he no longer wanted to mark them, he just wanted to applaud. That is when you know something has happened beyond defeat. But so what? Brazil win their first World Cup, not at home, not at Maracanazo, but in Europe. No non-European team had ever won a World Cup in Europe. Brazil do it against the host nation in the highest scoring final the tournament had ever seen. Pelé becomes Pelé. He is not yet the full global statesman of football. He's a teenager, but in 3 knockout matches he scores 6 goals. Wales, France, Sweden. In the final he becomes the youngest scorer in World Cup final history. And by the end of the day, he's not a prospect. He's a world champion. This is the beginning of Brazil's great age. 1958 in Sweden, 1962 in Chile, and 1970 in Mexico. 3 World Cups in 4 tournaments. Brazil become only the 2nd nation after Italy to win back-to-back World Cups, and they remain the last nation to do it, at least until now. That run is why Brazil becomes more than successful. Brazil becomes the idea of football. Pelé and Garrincha, Didi and Vavá, Nilton Santos and Djalma Santos, Zagallo as player, then coach, Santos touring the world with Pelé. Then 1970, which we talked about last week, Pelé's 3rd World Cup, Carlos Alberto's goal, the Jules Rimet Trophy, kept forever. And after that, every Brazil team lives in the shadow. The 1970s bring decline. 1982 team brings beauty, but without the trophy. 1994 brings a more pragmatic triumph. 2002 brings Ronaldo, Rivaldo, Ronaldinho, and a 5th star on the chest. Then 2014 brings the other extreme. Brazil hosting again, and Germany 7, Brazil 1. A new national trauma, not the Maracanazo, but a different kind of rupture. Still, the yellow shirt survives everything, the defeats, the pressure, the arguments, the commercialization, and the burden of being Brazil. And that burden begins here, in 1958, even though the final is played in blue. What about Sweden? This remains Sweden's best World Cup finish. That matters. They weren't extras in someone else's film. They were Olympic champions a decade earlier, hosts, finalists, and a serious football country whose exported players had already changed Italy. Liedholm goes on to become one of Serie A's great coaches. Hamrin becomes a Fiorentina legend. Gren remains part of Sweden's golden football memory. Sweden will have other moments, 1994 especially, but never again a World Cup final. And maybe that is why 1958 feels so clean in memory. It is Sweden's summit and Brazil's beginning. Not the beginning of Brazilian football, not the beginning of Brazilian skill, but the beginning of the global Brazil, the Brazil every child can imagine before learning the names of clubs, tactics, or confederations. Yellow shirt, green trim, Pelé, Garrincha, joy. And that is why the 1958 World Cup final is one of the hinges in football history. Before we go, 3 things to take away from June 29, 1958. First, Brazil didn't win simply because they were gifted. They won because they combined talent with preparation, tactical clarity, physical work, and the courage to trust Pelé and Garrincha when it mattered. Second, Sweden were worthy finalists. Their run carried the legacy of 1948, GreNoLi, the professional export generation and a host nation that beat serious opponents to reach the final. Third, this is the day Brazil becomes the world's football imagination. The first title, Pelé's arrival, the blue shirts, the Swedish applause, Bellini lifting the trophy, all of it turns victory into myth. On this day in 1958, Brazil beat Sweden 5-2 at Råsunda, won the World Cup for the first time, introduced Pelé to the summit, and began the age in which Brazil became Brazil. That is all for episode 241 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Lost Guy. If you like this story, help me push the show in front of more people by rating it 5 stars and sharing it with your friends. It really, really helps. And if you have an idea for the show, email me at otd@17lawsguy.com. Tomorrow, we go to June 30, 2006, Germany against Argentina, Jens Lehmann, a little list tucked into his sock, a penalty shootout, and the first post-match red card in World Cup history. See you then.